Now it's time to discuss jobs. Jobs are just processes like every other process on the system. What makes them different and why we give them their own separate little video section is because we actually initiate those and they attach themselves to the current terminal that we're in. And that's different than other processes that we may start on the system or that are started by default when the system boots up. For instance, let's take a look at a process that I'm going to start here right now. So actually, you know what I'll do? I'll type two processes. I will start with the one, we'll just put a sleep command in here for right now. And I'll say sleep for a long time and put in the background. That is a job. If I type jobs here at the command line, I can see that there is a job running in the background and it's attached to this terminal. That's different than if I was to start another process. Let's start another process like init.d named. First we'll check to see if it's started already. And it's not. All right, so let's start her up. Go up here, clear my screen, and we'll start. Now, if I type jobs at this point, the named process, which is the DNS server, is not part of my jobs, is running. I can see that. And if I type ps tree here and look at the tree, first of all, what we'll look for is the one that I started up here that has sleep in it. So here we go. Here is bash. And then I su'd in, started another instance of bash. So we see that hierarchy we've seen before. And then sleep was forked off as a job, right? So that's a child process. And if I put the P here, we can see that. We can actually see the PIDs. Where are you? There you go, right there. It's a little bit, widen it a little bit more. So there's the sleep process. It's 29.5 something. But what you don't see here associated with this bash shell that I originally started out with is the named process. The named process is on here someplace. We'll go track it down somewhere. Let's see. There it goes right there. We can see named is a process and it started, but it's not attached to my terminal. As a matter of fact, if I do a ps-ef and grep for named, we can actually see that here's the named process itself. And who is its parent? The parent process? Well, the parent process of named is init, the initial process, which is a lot different than if we were looking at just ps here, because this will show us, actually we'll do ps-l, so we can see the parental structure here. So we have the bash shell, so we su'd in, shows us the su, shows us that bash is the child of that process, and so on and so forth. But named is not in here. Named is completely separate. So jobs are attached to this instance of this particular terminal, and that's what makes them unique. All right, so let's go back. We'll look at jobs again. Jobs. We still have jobs on. Let's put some other jobs in here, just so we can play around with them a little bit. I'll type cat, and then I'll say dev urandom, just some random numbers, redirect it to dev null, and put that in the background too. The ampersand puts that in the background. If I don't put the ampersand there and just press enter, it takes away my terminal. Not a big deal, you're thinking, when you're here and we can just open up multiple terminals, but it is a big deal when you're SSH'd into a remote server, which is a very common way to be interacting with a Linux box. If I want this, okay, so now it's taken my terminal. Well, if I want to put this in the background, what I can do, there are two key sequences that will send signals to a job, keystroke sequences. One is Control-C, which will terminate it. The other one is Control-Z, so I press the Control-Z key, and that stops it. But I want it running again, but I want to put it in the background, not in the foreground, taking away my terminal. So you'll notice that there's a number here associated with this. We have a couple of ways we can look at this. There's a name, there's a number, and there's also this symbol, which basically references the last job that was in the foreground. What I will do here is I will use the BG for background and just put the number after that. So I have that job, I put it at BG, it puts it back there, I type jobs, and sure enough, we can see now that I have 2 jobs here. If I want to bring a job to the foreground for some reason, I can just type FG, and then the number of that particular job brings it to the foreground. Well, I don't want it. I want to put it back. Control Z stops it. BG now, if I want to, I don't even have to type BG. You can just reference it by its number. So what I could say is, and the number, and then ampersand to put in the background. And that will put it in the background. So that's an easy way. So if that's more comfortable for you, you can use the % sign to reference instead of foreground, background, because if I type nothing else here and just % and put the number there, or I could even put the name there if I wanted to. So if I want to call cat up to the foreground, I can do that with that. I typically prefer using FG and BG because it's very clear to me and there's no possibility I'm going to make a mistake, but that's an option that you have. So we can control these jobs by being them to the foreground or the background. And as we saw in the last section, when we're dealing with things attached to terminals, as many times when you close a terminal, that process may go away. And so it's important that when you're starting a process, you make sure that the terminal that it's attached to is not going to disappear. And there's lots of utilities, one I've mentioned before, Screen, which I'll be doing a video on. So that's a little introduction to jobs and how we can manipulate jobs, foreground, background, moving them around. Next, we'll look at the kill command. This is when we're sending signals. So when I type Control Z and stop it, that literally is a signal that I am sending to the system. And if I type STTYA here, -A, clear my screen, and press enter, you can see the different types of signals that can be sent. This is a very common one. Control C for interrupt, and then Control Z for suspend, which basically stops the process and allows you then to put in the background or put in the foreground. So the kill command's up next. That's where we're going.